Hello everyone, this is BSJ and this is going to be the start of my Slark hero guide.
Banana slam jam.
And with this guide we're going to start first and foremost with my description of Slark in a nutshell. I believe every hero in Dota suffers issues. Like if a game's going well, this is what it looks like. If a game's going poorly, this is what it looks like. I think I've mentioned that in many of my prior guides before. For Slark, he's a very selfish hero. If you look at his toolkit, not a single one of his abilities benefits his team in any way. Dark Pact is a purely selfish purge. Pounce is a escape mechanism / initiation that really only helps him. Essence Shift only helps him. And Shadow Dance can honestly be a detriment to your team sometimes because you do it to make yourself live, and sometimes your team will pay the price for it. So needless to say, when it comes to building Slark, it's all about enabling your own game. What I mean by that is there are ways to play Slark that enable your teammates, and we're going to talk about that. But I very rarely worry about my teammates when it comes to my item build. I recognize my own job in the game, and I say, okay, I have to be able to do that job, and as Slark, the only concern to me is really figuring out what that job is. So Slark, when he's in a bad game, he has two core issues. One, being able to hit people. Because of the way Essence Shift works, the more you're hitting people, the better, right? And the two ways you have a problem hitting people is that you can't get on top of them, or you don't hit them like fast enough, or you don't have a way to lock them down once you do get on top of them. So example of something to get on top of them would be a Shadow Blade or a Diffusal. Something to lock them down once you do would be an Abyssal or a Scotty. Pretty much every item Slark builds is all about helping him hit people. Because at the end of the day, hitting people gives you stats, it takes away the opponent's stats, and that's the entire core concept of Slark. Yeah, you may argue a lot of carries rely on hitting people or whatever, but that's Slark's only concern. That is all he cares about. If Slark can hit people, usually that means he's winning the game. But with that in tandem, there is one other problem the hero suffers. And that's that he's only single target damage. Yeah, Dark Pact's in an AoE, but let's be honest. At the end of the day, he's single target damage. Because you have so many escape mechanisms, because you're so mobile, and your stat gains are complete crap if you ignore Essence Shift, basically, what I'm getting at is the hero can potentially run into this issue where the opponent's allowed to 5-man, and you don't deal enough damage by the time either you're dead or the rest of your team is dead. So when it comes to hitting people, it's not only that you have to be able to hit people, you have to balance it between hitting them, but also being enough of a threat and tanky enough such that you are not burstable full to zero, but that they also can't just get hit by you while killing the rest of your team. Because if you don't do enough damage, the best way to deal with Slark is to just ignore him while killing the rest of his team and then 5-man focus him. Because Slark, even though he's got all these escape ability tools, at the end of the day, if he's alone, just like any other hero in the game, he will usually feed. So with that in mind, you need to you need to check some boxes on Slark. First and foremost, we're not at threat of dying instantly. Because we have so many survivability mechanisms, we want to make sure we're able to use them to our max potential. Our ult basically gives us 2 lives. So as long as we're able to capitalize on that somewhat, that's really important. Once we cover that basis, being able to hit people in regards to actually closing the gap in the first place is super important. If you can't get on top of them in the first place, we're not exactly worried that you can continue hitting them. So the first step is survivability. Second step is being able to get on top of them. Third step is being able to stay on top of them. Slark often deals with a lot of force staffs, being that you can now force staff out of Pounce. Slark usually deals with force staffs, ghost scepters, glimmer capes, Yule scepters, etc. And you want this combination of being sustainable enough to be in their face hitting them, but also that you can keep hitting them because you lock them down. That's why you almost always have an item like Scotty or Abyssal in your build. Some games you do have to consider items like Nullifier, but that's a much more situational item. So when we're talking about the core concept of what makes Slark Slark, I have played 800 games of Slark. He is my favorite hero in Dota. Let's be very clear about that. I love Slark. Ever since the dawn of time that I ran into Slark, I just fell in love with the hero. I think the hero is super fun. His potential is limitless in regards to, I think he's a very easy hero to play mediocrely because he has so much room for forgiveness, like wiggle room of if you mess up, usually instead of dying, you simply have to like disengage the fight or you yourself are not going to be a part of the fight. But at the same time, at the highest level, there's so much discipline, so much patience, and so much proper spellcasting required for Slark. The growth of the hero never really stops, at least in my opinion. I feel like I always learn something new, and that's the beauty of the hero. A lot of heroes in Dota have some similarities with that, but I think Slark has always been my favorite. So now that we've discussed the core concept of Slark, we're going to go through his abilities and his items. So when it comes to Slark's abilities, we're going to talk about the mechanics of each one. So if we look at Dark Pact, we're going to assume that, 90% of the game, your Dark Pact's at max level. So yes, the cooldown goes down. And so we're going to assume because most of your Dark Pacts are going to be once it's maxed, we're going to talk about how this ability works. So basically, you queue up the ability, and a second and a half later, you purge yourself. The purge itself lasts for a second. Does it even say that? It doesn't. Gotta love Dota tooltips. So the way it works is that you push Q, or whatever your hotkey is. It triggers the delay. A second and a half later, you purge yourself. And the purge is a continuous dispel for a second. So what that means is after you push Q, you have 2.5 seconds to get stunned, silenced, whatever, before you have to be able to push another button to back yourself up. So I think it's really important to note that Dark Pact is Slark's #1 survivability tool. Like, this is the one where I think it's the most defining. And it also means that if a hero goes around Dark Pact, it's usually one of his worst matchups. Abilities in the game that are not dispellable by Dark Pact. We'll go through them. Axe Call, but usually you address that with Sanj and Yasha and or Satanic. Bristleback Quills, but still a good matchup for you. Doom can be quite an annoying matchup because you cannot get rid of his ultimate. X Marks the Spot from cont'd also makes him a super annoying hero to deal with because in the early to mid game, he's usually too tanky for you to kill, and also means that he can basically reliably bring you back to his team and collapse on top of you. Legion Duel can be super hard to play against. I actually find Tiny to be a bit annoying. Tiny Toss is not dispellable, so when you get tossed up in the air, but also even if you dispel Avalanche, it gets reapplied to you. So Tiny can be a bit annoying as a disabler, especially in the early to mid game, being that he threatens the whole burst you down to 0 before you can react concept. Bloodseeker Rupture is another skill that is not dispellable, which makes him a pseudo counter, meaning that if you're able to stand your ground and man up, I think if you have like an IO support or an Oracle support, the Bloodseeker matchup's not all that bad, but if you don't have like a healing sustain support, the Bloodseeker matchup can be pretty awful. Faceless Void, Chronosphere, one of the worst matchups in the game. It got a bit better when they made it so Faceless Void can't time walk out of your Pounce, but pretty much anytime Faceless Void's Chronosphere is up, it makes it really hard for you to play. So I always try to avoid that matchup at all costs. One of the worst carry matchups in the game. Naga Sleep is not dispellable. It's obviously a continuously applied sleep. Unless they patch it by the time you watch this video, it is super annoying. If you ult and then Naga Siren ults on top of you, it actually reveals you. I don't really know why, but not only do you get your ult time wasted because you're not able to hit people during your ult, but it also shows you so you don't get healed by the ult itself. Razor Static Link, but he's not actually a counter, just something to consider. Ricky, his Cloud, although that may be obvious that it's not dispellable, can be super annoying to play against Ricky in a meta where Ricky is popular. I think in 7.27, Slark's just a far better hero. Specter's Dagger. I think Specter's a pretty good matchup for Slark most patches. I'd say this matchup goes back and forth because both heroes represent something quite strong against the other. Slark limits Specter's mobility, also naturally builds Silver Edge, but Specter's Dagger is super annoying. You cannot dispel it, and it reveals you, unless you're actually in your ultimate, but it reveals you if you're in invis. So the only way you can heal when you're Specter Daggered is to ult. So it's super annoying because it prevents you from weaving in and out of fights to get your health regen back. Ursa Fury Swipes, but that's also usually a good matchup for Slark. Venomancer ult, also not a terrible matchup for Slark. Ancient Apparition's ult, super annoying as Slark because he is one of the best heroes in the game to prevent you from being able to enter the fight. If they have any sort of reliable setup to set up his ultimate, because he also prevents you from regenerating your ult, Ancient Apparition can be one of the worst supports to pick Slark into. Disruptor's Glimpse, also glimpsing him into Static Storm / Kinetic Field. You can't pounce out of Kinetic Field, and obviously since you can't purge a Glimpse, it can be super annoying support to deal with in certain games. Enigma's Black Hole. Grimstroke's Phantom. I would not say Grimstroke's Phantom's a hard counter, but it is something 100% worth considering when playing Slark. Necrophos's Reaper Scythe. Another hero that can be super annoying for Slark to deal with when he's in meta. Because basically, like I said, Slark relies on having 2 health pools. You want to get down to like half health or lower, then ult. Necrophos makes that quite difficult to pull off. OD, pretty bad hero at the current moment, so you don't have to worry about that, but he is one of Slark's worst matchups, if not the worst. Not only can he not dispel Astral Imprisonment, but also OD can one-shot you most times, especially during your ultimate. So that matchup's pretty bad. Shadow Demon Disruption cannot be purged. Let's see. Winter Wyvern's Winter's Curse cannot be purged. And Maledict cannot be purged. So I would say Winter Wyvern's a super annoying matchup because she kind of saves her teammates, but more so sets up for her teammates to go on you by ulting you. It's a long enough duration ult that you're always going to have your Dark Pact go off, and then the enemy team can reliably stun you afterwards. So Wyvern's an issue if they have a follow-up stun to kill you off of the Wyvern Curse. Maledict's not nearly as bad because it's an ability that relies on you losing health, and you can utilize your regen mechanic to usually not have to deal with that one. As far as I know, those are all the abilities in Dota that are not dispellable. Something worth noting, though, somebody in chat has already mentioned, is Slark can be slightly annoying against heroes that have instacast abilities, such as Lion, such as Shadow Shaman. I love Slark. The Dream Slark game is against heroes like Jakiro, Vengeful Spirit, Sven. These animation projectile stuns where you see them use the stun and then you push Dark Pact in response. I believe the Hex matchups can be annoying, but by no means would I not be willing to pick Slark into them. It requires you to have a different use of Dark Pact in general, and something that's really important when considering the use of your Dark Pact is whether or not you need to use it preemptively. Very important. If you go onto a target and they have an Earthshaker behind, like if they have an Earthshaker that's missing off the map, you have to Dark Pact immediately. And by the time your Dark Pact is over, that 2.5 second period, that's what the 2.5 second period does for you. And that's what I love about Slark. Slark requires patience, but quick thinking. Because this Dark Pact ability, when it's a survivability tool for you, meaning that it's a reliable way to dispel whatever they may stun you with, or slow you with, or silence you with, it gives you 2.5 seconds to hit somebody and also process the situation that you're in. You know, do I need to ult right afterwards? Do I need to pounce away? You know, what do I need to do after that 2.5 seconds is over? Because it's 2.5 seconds of ignoring stuns, basically, you only have a 3.5 second window that the hero is vulnerable. So playing against Slark, it's super important to capitalize on that 3.5 second window. And playing as Slark, it's super important to position yourself in a way such that during that 2.5 seconds, you want to bait out as many spells as possible being thrown at you. But during that 3.5 seconds, you want to be very careful of being in a position that can get bursted. So it's really important that you learn this gauge of, do I walk away? Am I good to keep hitting? Do I have to BKB after my pact is over? Do I have to ult? Do I have to pounce away? Can I not pounce in, but if I see somebody, I can pounce away? Like, what is my reaction once that 2.5 seconds is over? When you're dealing with instant disables, you always have to pact. Sometimes it's better to hold your pact. Like if you pounce on top of somebody, you need to wait until you see the Jakiro in the back casting Ice Path, and then you pact, you know? That's an example where holding your pact for an extra couple seconds basically extends that 2.5 second period, right? But if you don't use it early enough and get stunned by a Hex and instant disable, that's a disaster. When learning Slark and at the highest level, it's always better to be safe than sorry. If there's something that could potentially stun you, pact. If there's something that could potentially burst you, full to 0, use any and all of your skills to make sure that does not happen. And we'll continue to talk about his other skills as we move forward. So, we look at Pounce. Pounce is an incredibly unique ability in Dota. It's an ability that not only can be used for initiation, it can also be used for escape, but it also is an ability that locks down a lot of mobile heroes in the game. So it's a leash that if a hero can't get out of it, usually Slark's good against them now. Slark's matchups over the years have changed drastically due to the fact that in the old days, any hero with mobility would be able to get out of Slark's Pounce, but nowadays, he's almost the counter to all of these mobility heroes. Not always, but a lot of the matchups have gotten drastically better. In the old days, Anti-Mage was one of Slark's worst matchups, and now the matchup can go either way simply because not only does Anti-Mage threaten to kill you, but you also threaten to kill him. I think the most noob mistake I see on Slark players, like if I can tell a Slark player is a noob, it is the use of their Pounce. If you pounce forward, that tells me that you are 100% committed to the fight. If you pounce forward, if you ever get in danger, your only way out is to ult. So I want you to think of your Pounce in most games as a, if I use this correctly, I'll be able to preserve my ult much better kind of skill. If I pounce in and I'm in danger, suddenly I may have to ult way earlier than I need to. A lot of times people pounce just for the sake of pouncing. I think what people don't realize is Pounce is all about hitting people. If I'm already hitting them, why am I pouncing, right? If they're silenced or stunned by somebody else, why am I pouncing? If I can walk at them instead of pounce them, like say I have a diffusal, why am I pouncing them? Only pounce them out of complete necessity. That is really my best advice. That applies in the laning phase. That applies in the mid to late game. Your Pounce is your most versatile skill, and if used improperly, can be pretty detrimental to your impact in team fights as well as your laning. I feel like if I see a bad Slark player, they impatiently pounce all the time. In lane, they won't have gotten any Essence Shift stacks yet, and they'll just pounce a guy for the sake of pouncing them. Almost always in lane, you want to hit the guy once or twice if he chooses to man up on you because you have Essence Shift stacks, which gives you more damage than less damage. At that point, you commit the pounce. Slark's abilities in tandem are quite cool to think about. I love using Dark Pact in a way where during that last half a second or so, I pounce to get away. That's like the ideal smooth way to get away as Slark. It's something I want to show you really quickly. So a quick example of what I'm talking about using Pounce and Dark Pact in tandem. It's not a super fancy mechanic, but it's something I feel like you should really hone down on Slark because you use it a lot. I would say you use it at least 5 to 10 times a game and sometimes even multiple times in one team fight. Is I see the Sven running at me, I see an Earth Spirit rolling at me, and I'm pacting, right? I queued my Pact up the farm, whatever I'm using my Pact for, it doesn't matter. But then right at the end of my Pact, I'm going to pounce. Notice that? Where if he had silenced me, the Pact would have removed it. If he had tried to stun me, the Pact would have removed it right before I started my pounce. It's really important to think about that. Have that internal timer where your pounce goes off right at the end of the Pact. You don't want to do it any later because it means you might not get your pounce off in the first place. And you don't want to do it any earlier because that means you might have not baited out any spells. Our goal on Slark with the Pact is to bait as many spells as possible. It's not just an escape tool. It is a baiting tool. We are trying to make people stun us and waste them. That is like the beautiful, perfect use of Dark Pact. It's not only to remove stuns, but make people waste as many skills as humanly possible. So when it comes to Pounce, that's a really important mechanic using those two together. Essence Shift. My favorite ability in all of Dota. One of the most satisfying abilities in all of Dota, and I love it, especially what they've done to it over time. So they've made it such that if you kill somebody, you get permanent agility. So the radius you have to be within somebody that does die if you don't get the last hit is 300. They have to be affected by Essence Shift, and you have to be within 300 radius of them. Which is pretty short, by the way. There's games where you'll hit somebody, the guy will continue running during the animation of your attack, somebody else will kill them, and the guy will be 350 units away from you. And you won't get the last hit, or you won't get the Essence Shift. So it's really important to get a good idea of what 300 is, and if possible, to stay within that range to make sure you get that extra permanent agility. But because they've added this permanent agility, they've changed the ability a lot. It used to be that Slark, with his level 25 talent, would have 240 seconds of Essence Shift. That was pretty insane. And it was also 120 Essence Shift duration at max level. But now, since they've nerfed it down to 100, and they've also nerfed his level 25 talent drastically, the hero does obviously rely still on getting a bunch of stacks. But it's much more about consistent pressure, consistent stat gain by being able to participate in fights. Essence Shift defines Slark. period. I've said it a bit in his problems that he faces and the way you want to itemize. But let's just be honest. Slark's entire kit is all about making sure he can Essence Shift and hit people. Slark with 30 Essence Shift stacks, scariest hero in all of Dota. No question about it. Like, that is all there is to it. Slark with 0 Essence Shift stacks kind of hits like a wet noodle. Like, he does not hit very hard. Almost every game he does not have Essence Shift stacks. Not only do Essence Shift stacks give you damage, they give you attack speed, they give you armor. So that's something that a lot of players don't realize. My favorite's when the opponent tries to kill me when I have 30 Essence Shift stacks. Do you not realize that 90 agility gives me 15 armor? That's a lot. So it's something to really consider when playing as Slark and against Slark. It makes his mana potential insane if he gets to that critical threshold of Essence Shift. Every single game, that critical threshold's a bit different. Sometimes it's 10 to 15, sometimes it's upwards of 40. And I never really hit people with the intent of getting Essence Shift. What I mean by that is, like, don't kill yourself to get more hits. Don't hit the tanky targets because they'll give you more Essence Shift. Don't let this change the target that you go for, I think is the best description of what I'm trying to say here. I've fallen into that trap where I'm like, oh, that juicy Centaur, I'm going to hit him 25 times, and by the time I'm done hitting Centaur, he's still not dead, and the rest of my team is dead. But I have that sweet 75 Agi, but we lost the team fight anyway. So super important to not get tunnel visioned on the target you're trying to steal Essence Shift stacks from. That is a very important discipline to have on Slark. But also, like, if you're going for the final blow and you know the guy's going to die, no reason to use Dark Pact, right? To get that extra damage. You want as many attacks to go off as possible every time you hit somebody. As Slark, the goal is to never take a straight up 5v5. Like, it's not that you can't, but the dream for Slark is that he starts the fight off hitting somebody isolated, right? You hit somebody on the outskirts, whether that's a support or a core that's alone, you get that 5 to 10 Essence Shift stacks, and suddenly you're going to the fight with the extra 15 damage, 15 attack speed, 30 damage, 30 attack speed, extra bit of armor. It adds up very quickly. This ability snowballs very hard. So it's super important that you consider its usage, and all of your items go into making sure you get maximum usage out of it, but it does not affect your decision making in terms of target. It is really important that if you do want to fight with Essence Shift, that you become super aggressive on the map, at least as aggressive as possible. It helps you shred buildings. Slark's actually a really good building hitter if he has Essence Shift stacks. Slark can basically just snowball one set of Essence Shift stacks into another. You have 100 seconds, right? So you can turn that into potentially getting more kills, more map control. Slark is all about map control. And as we move forward, we're going to talk why he's all about map control and why he's like the #1 map controlling carry in the game. With no map control, Slark is ass. With map control, Slark is the scariest hero in all of Dota. So we're going to talk about that in how it pertains to his ultimate. So yes, Slark's ultimate is basically a get out of jail free card. Most games, right? It's where you get like 4 seconds to get all of your health back, or not all your health back, to get a good percentage of your health back, and also you can hit people during it, potentially. What I want to talk about is heroes that can be really annoying for Slark. I think the hardest Slark games are actually defined by his ult. And usually that's because the opponent has so much ground damage that you can't hit people while you're in your ult. Or you may have to ult and BKB at the same time. I want you to think about what abilities, what heroes in the game are good against BKB and are good against Slark's ult. And what I mean by that is an example that's bad against BKB but good against Slark's ult is Leshrac. If Leshrac casts Diabolic Edict, casts his ult, his Split Earth, it all hits you in your ultimate. That type of damage can be super overwhelming for Slark. Heroes like that in the early to mid game aren't possible to deal with because they kill you before you kill them. Because Slark's damage output is relatively limited, especially early and before he gets Essence Shift stacks, those type of matchups can be really hard. And I don't want to have to BKB and ult at the same time. So if I'm against a hero like Leshrac, as long as I can BKB to hit the Leshrac and not be afraid of dying to right clicks, so basically an overwhelming amount of magic damage that kills me in my ult, but also enough physical damage that threatens me while BKB'd, that's like a really bad Slark game. An example of why AA is bad is because all of this shit hits you when you're in your ult. Another example of heroes that hit you in your ult, CM can be super annoying. Disruptor. Queen of Pain, Puck, even Lena can be pretty annoying sometimes. These matchups aren't all bad. Kunkka, I already mentioned, as a bad matchup because you can't purge X, but all this shit also hits you when you're in your ult. It's just, if there's too many heroes like this, it usually means Slark's a hard hero to play. If there's just too many of them. Because at some point, your ult is a shit runaway card, and that's not what we want to use it for. Obviously, if you need to use it for that, use it. But that's not what we want. So when it comes to Slark's ult, that's how I want you to think about a lot of his counters as well. Some of these heroes can be super annoying. And like I said, 1 or 2 of them, whatever. If they have 3 or 4 of them, bad Slark game. Pretty straightforward there. There's that critical threshold where you can ult and sustain through the damage, and so it's fine, or you ult and you just die anyway, which is not fine. Another important part of Slark's ult and why it makes him the best hero for map control in the entire game is it tells you when people see you. It tells you when neutral creeps see you, and it tells you when heroes see you, or wards. If the enemy has visions on you, whether or not that's neutrals or whether or not that's heroes on the other side. So notice how my ult goes off, right? After I finish the neutrals because they're hitting me, my ult takes a second and then it triggers back on. So there's like this delay. Obviously my ult gives me movement speed and regen. It is really important on Slark to not take fights in an area where the opponent has vision on you, period. And that your team needs to understand that too. Like, you need to understand that, your team needs to understand that. You should never get baited into fighting in an area where you know they have vision. And you may say, BSJ, if we're initiating onto them, why does vision matter? Because a lot of Slark's kit, with the combination of Pounce, Dark Pact, Disengage, and with the way your ult works, is going down to 20%, 30% health, disengaging, sitting in fog, sitting behind trees, getting all of your health back, and then coming back with full. And that's not possible if they have a ward on the high ground that sees you. So I pretty much never fight on Slark when I know the opponent has vision somewhere. It's like one of the most deciding factors on whether or not a fight is good for Slark or not. It's a really important factor when you're considering playing this hero. If the opponent has a ward on you, oh man, free D wards, man. They can't do anything about it. There's several stages in the game that I'll carry a sentry on me. As the game goes on, I'm less and less likely, but especially in the early game. And I want to show you what I mean. Because D wards give you gold now. Let's ignore that I fed. D wards give you gold now. So once I get level 6, super early on in the game, and I know I'm leaving my lane, notice how I flew myself an item, and I also flew myself a sentry. And I'm going to walk out basically across the map, like conveniently. I'm not just going to ignore creeps, but as I'm farming creeps, I'll purposely take paths that check wards. It's really important, especially when you see heroes in other lanes. There's 2 dangers to dewarding, right? Is one, you don't have time to deward it, because sometimes it takes you pinpointing the location of the ward by kiting behind trees and seeing if it still sees you, or what have you. But then also, it's like, while you're in vision, because you know there's a ward and you're trying to find it, the opponent just kills you. That can be super frustrating. So it's really important to avoid that possibility, which is most notably done when the opponent is showing on other lanes. But notice here, I'm going to run through mid, I'm going to get detected, and I know the ward didn't see me over here, but I knew it'd see me right here, so it has to be on their side of the river, over here. Technically, it could have been over here. So that was maybe a bit, honestly, wrong. But I walk up the high ground and I get the D ward. That's super important to Slark. The sentry costs 75 gold. The wards always give more. So usually you can spend 2 sentries to get a ward. When it comes to dewarding, a side note, it's really important, even more so, to carry sentries with you at night. Because at night, heroes on the enemy team only have 800 vision. While during the day, they have 1800 vision. At least that's most heroes in the game, right? So it's much easier to pinpoint that you are seen by a ward, especially since tower vision is also limited. It's much easier to pinpoint that you are seen by a ward and thus deward at nighttime than it is during the day. Much easier. Also, how did I not mention this? Talked about the vision game with Slark being his most broken component. Guess who's one of the only heroes in the game of Dota 2 with full 1800 night vision? That's Slark for you, baby. Slark's most annoying kit is his vision kit. We talked about it with his ult and talked about dewarding. And in team fights and mid to late game, if it is nighttime, please understand, you are a moving ward. The rest of your teammates, They see in an 800 AoE. You see in an 1800 AoE. Let's do some quick maths. 8 squared, that's 64. 18 squared, 1 second. That's 324. So we're dealing with 64 to 324. You see 5 times as much. 5 times as much as a nighttime hero with full vision. You see 5 times the AoE. 5 times. One of the worst things is when I have a Slark on my team. It is nighttime. We are smoked up. We are looking to get kills, or we're just running into the opponent jungle. And the Slark takes a path that does not provide me with a nice 1800 vision of enemies. Please, as Slark, consider the fact that you are one of the few heroes in the game that sees 1800 vision at nighttime. It is actually one of the most influential ways to play Slark. I can't really show you a good example because, man, I would have to go digging. But if you watch me play Slark, you watch any other good player play Slark, please watch at nighttime how keen they are on scouting for their teammates, especially during ganks and team fights. The best thing about Slark is you know when the opponent sees you. You know. So when you're jungling, when you're running around the map, you should never get initiated onto by a surprise. Whenever I'm walking around the map from camp to camp or whatever, I am keeping an eye out on my buff bar. And I'm seeing, okay, do I have my ult? Does my ult get triggered? If I'm running around the map and I know Dark Pact is a free skill, I'm looking at this ult, and if it goes off, I'm immediately pushing Dark Pact. I don't know why sometimes, meaning maybe they're smoked, maybe it's an invis hero, maybe it's a ward, whatever. But the last thing I want to do is go into vision, give them that second or two to just go on me. One of the biggest crucial errors you can make as Slark is go into vision, have the knowledge to know you're in vision because your ult goes off, and then not pushing Pact or like getting initiated onto immediately. So sometimes, even if it's just a ward, I'm going to Dark Pact every time because it's just not worth that risk unless I'm like fully aware of everyone missing on the map. It is a bit harder when you're dealing with heroes like Faceless Void, heroes like Doom. In that case, I'll usually Dark Pact instantly and Pounce away. Such that if these abilities like Doom go off, at least I got my Pounce off. It's all about once you get seen, what will your reaction be? It's based on what heroes are missing. It's based on what heroes threaten you. It's based on what items they have, all that kind of stuff. But please do not walk through vision and not notice it. It is the 4K way. I have people complaining about their Slarks all the time. The best part about Slark is free D-wards, guys. It is the best part. And now you don't even have to let your supports do it for you. You can buy the sentries and get the money for it. It's beautiful. So I will almost always fly myself a sentry super early on, around the time I hit 6. Unless my game is just completely atrocious. But even then, I would love to get that extra gold from getting the D-ward. So in this game, you're going to see that I had a rough start. And I am going to move forward after his ultimate to talk about, I guess, the finishing point real quick. Finishing point is when you're ahead, the enemy team should literally have 0 wards. You should be, say we're ahead on Radiant, you basically run back and forth on Slark checking wards while farming, right? You are checking everywhere. They don't get a lick of vision. They don't deserve anything. They don't get anything. That's the beauty of Slark, is that you can know with impunity that they do not see you. Right? That is the only hero in the game that can do that. So it is super important that if you are ahead, that you make use of that advantage that Slark does gain. So we're going to talk about items. We're going to talk about skill build. We're going to talk about playstyle. Skill build real quick. Level 1 on Slark. All 3 of your skills are honestly viable. Pounce is the one you want to take the least. Pounce is a necessity. You fucked up at the rune. You got, people chasing you, and you have to pounce away. That's a rare exception. We don't want to take that skill. But if we absolutely have to, it's better than dying. Dark Pact is great at helping you secure range creeps through heroes that stun, through heroes like Rubik that have Fade Bolt, attack slows like Phoenix. It's super great for securing range creeps because it's an ability that goes off while you're attacking. So it gives you that extra 75 damage over time with your right click, and also purges any stuns or slows that are trying to prevent you from getting that range creep. So strongly consider leveling Dark Pact as a way to secure a range creep when your support can't, or you can now because you have Dark Pact rather than not. It's also better against ranged heroes in general. I love Dark Pact against Bat Rider. Essence Shift goes down in value when you're against ranged heroes. Like in my lane, I was against Rubik, Death Prophet, Earth Spirit, Death Prophet, but the core is a Death Prophet, so I'm not hitting her very often. Pretty much by level 3, most games I'll have 1-1-1. There are exceptions where sometimes I'll skip Pounce or Essence Shift and put 2 points in Pact. And there's also some exceptions where I'm crushing the lane and I'll skip Pact and go 0-1-2. I'd say my skill build is either 1-1-1, 2-1-0, or 0-1-2. There's very few matchups, if any, that it's not one of those. At the end of the day, though, at level 7, unless I put a second point in Essence Shift, I am always maxing my Pact. I have not been able to find reason enough to max Essence Shift past 2 points. I feel like at that point, the ability is good enough as is, going from 15 seconds to 30, and I see no reason to max it out in the laning stage in a way that would delay my farm, because Dark Pact is my farming skill. It is the only way for me to clear camps, it is the only way for me to clear waves. So I really need my Dark Pact. Once you max out your Dark Pact, obviously taking your ult at every level that you can, Pounces if you feel like your problem is locking on targets. Essence Shift is if you don't feel like you have a problem locking on targets. Because, like, say you have an Echo Saber at that point, you have drums, you have a Diffusal, they have less mobility and you can kind of just walk at them. That's the consideration. Do I need that lower cooldown Pounce? Do I need that ability to get on top of them? Because level 1 Pounce is more so of an escape to me than anything. Like, yeah, I can use it to finish somebody off to make sure they don't get away. But very rarely do I want to commit to fights with level 1 Pounce, if possible, because of the cooldown being so long. So if I know I need to commit to fights with Pounce, I'll usually max that before I max Essence Shift. Moving forward, Essence Shift is the one that you want to take, but be very careful. I love baiting shitty Slark players, like those 6k Slark players that, watch my guide from 4 years ago and think they're hot shit. And if they're at the rune and they hit somebody with Essence Shift and there's 3 of us, they're going to die. So please be very wary, especially at the rune, especially in the lane. Do not think you're all high and mighty with your Essence Shift and be like, I'm going to hit this guy, and then just die to 3 heroes because you don't have Pact or Pounce to get away from them. So be very wary when you're leveling Essence Shift. It is the dream ability. It is the ability that gives him all of his good lane matchups. All of Slark's best matchups, with this in mind, are the heroes that don't stun you through Pact. They have long, projectile stuns or no stuns at all, and you just hit them a lot. Heroes that previously rely on tanking through skills. I'd say Timber's not the best counter, or not the best hero to counter. Like, he is nice, but it's not like a perfect one-to-one counter, because with a good support, Timber can beat you in lane. But these heroes would obviously include Timber, Underlord, Tidehunter. These heroes that usually want to be in front soaking damage, those are the dream heroes for Slark to be playing against. Those are the absolute best matchups. When it comes to the carry role, it's pretty much all the heroes I didn't mention that you're fine to pick them against. The one thing about carry matchups is that Slark is heavily reliant on mana. Heavily. If Slark has no mana, he's useless. So heroes that counter his ability to play these long drawn out fights and burn his mana are super annoying. Anti-Mage, Phantom Lancer, Naga Siren with the Diffusal, all these illusion heroes with Diffusals or mana burn can be super obnoxious. So unless you have multiple ways of dealing with those heroes other than yourself, Slark has very poor matchups against those heroes. Because usually, even if he goes like the Diffusal build himself, he's like a weaker version of them. In terms of he wants a long fight, they want a long fight, all of his mana's gone before theirs is, and then they win. But his best matchups are heroes like Lifestealer, usually heroes like Ursa, potentially Troll Warlord, Drow, Spectre. PA can go either way, depends on the game. Lycan's usually a pretty good matchup, Bristleback. I love picking him against Bounty Hunter, Core, or Support. All of Bounty Hunter's shit gets purged by you, and you lock him down as a hero that relies on mobility. I like him against Jug. Like him against Lone Druid if they don't threaten 5-man pushing. I like him against Luna if they don't threaten 5-man pushing. How does Slark match up against Alk? I like the Slark versus Alk matchup. You have to go like an early paced game where you go like Drums Diffusal or just straight Diffusal and you run at the Alk while he's farming. It's all about having a good lane in those types of matchups. So if you're dealing with Slark against these hyper greedy carries like Anti-Mage, Alchemist, I'd say Alchemist is a much better matchup because he doesn't really threaten you, while Anti-Mage does threaten you with his mana burn. But these heroes, it's all about looking at your lane matchup and saying, okay, I'm going to snowball this lane, so I'll be able to pressure these heroes. I would say on Slark, you're almost always trying to go for a good lane, but I'm willing to pick him in a game where he scales really well and his lane's going to be okay. So what I mean by scales really well is he's against something like a Lifestealer, an Ursa, a Jug. These heroes that you're not exactly pressured to stop them, and eventually you'll beat them. In that case, I'm much less concerned about my lane matchup, and I'm only really concerned about my lane matchup when it's heroes like Alk and Anti-Mage, where I have to punish their weak early game, otherwise the matchup's bad, because they outfarm me. The reason why Slark doesn't go Battle Fury and all this kind of crap is he just doesn't scale as well as these other heroes. BSJ, why does Slark not scale as well as these other heroes? Take a gander at his fucking stat gains. You want to know? Look at these stat gains, all in the one column. 1 stat gains. Compare that to a Terrorblade. 4.8. Compare that to even like an Anti-Mage, right? 2.8. Like, every level, they're getting an extra 1 to 3 agility on you. They outscale you, dog. If you let them have the same farm as you do. So somebody asked, what are the best combinations with Slark? The heroes I love, so we're going to talk about Slark's problems, right? So Slark's issues are that he can't hit people, he can't sustain through the damage, and he doesn't do enough damage to prevent them from 5-manning. So on Slark, I like to avoid having too much pick-off on my team. Slark is the off-map pick-off hero. He is the play-alone hero. That is what he does. But you don't need more of those. He is a hero that loves having supports that enable his aggression, whether or not that's a Grimstroke that helps him get in there better, whether or not that's a Oracle that gives him that extra bit of survivability and he can utilize his abilities more conservatively, whether or not that's an Ogre that buffs up your damage. These are the type of supports Slark loves to play with. He also loves to play with teamfight supports, Wyvern, Undying, these types of heroes that really enable a hero that lacks 5-manning to be able to 5-man. He wants to play with a core that can follow him up. He usually likes having one other mobile hero on his team, to some extent. Like it can be like a Puck, a Quap, an Ember, but like I said, you need to balance that mobility with the fact that, only one of you is going to be able to play alone most of the game. Otherwise, you're just feeding when you're split pushing. He likes to have aura building offlaners almost always. Like, it doesn't mean you can't pick them with like the initiating offlaners, but because like I did say, you need a +1. That +1 can come from the offlane. It can be like a hero that helps set up your Pounce, like a Sand King. But he loves having the heroes that buff him up. Slark is the most greedy hero in all of Dota. He loves Magnus. He loves, Beastmaster. He loves heroes that either buff him up or he can naturally rotate to them. He loves showing up in other people's lanes, having them show on the lane, stun the guy, or like give vision, and then Slark capitalizes, right? That's the biggest part about Slark. That really needs to be understood in his synergies with the heroes on his team. He never builds team items, so usually you want a team item hero on your team. But like I said, heroes that make it hard for you to survive, or make it so it's too hard for you to deal enough damage before they kill all your teammates or buildings. So it's the whole, they threaten to pick you off when you're split pushing, and or you're not allowed to kill anybody because they're always grouped as 5. Those are the nightmarish situations for Slark. So rather than going through each individual matchup, just consider those situations to be the really bad ones. I almost always take the strength talent. Obviously, these talents may be different by the time you watch this video, but I almost always take strength. I feel like my first issue, which is the I can't tank through their shit, is the issue, then lifesteal is the better talent. If I feel like my second issue, where they're 5-manning and they're just ignoring me, is the issue, I take the attack speed talent. Beautiful. Okay, cool. Now that we've thought about Slark that way. Level 20, I almost always take the Dark Pact damage. The Pounce Leash usually just isn't good enough, but if they have heroes that I just absolutely need it against, I will consider it. And then at level 25, I don't think I've ever taken the Shadow Dance duration. I would almost always take the Essence Shift duration. It's just, on paper, like, it makes the hero's kits so much better. So I can't really argue a point in the game where I would, a certain game where I would go for the Shadow Dance duration talent. So when it comes to your itemization in lane and game, as many Wraith Bands as you need to trade. If you're against heroes like Batrider, I usually skip Wraith Bands because you don't need to trade with them at all. You just need the wand to sustain, and then you can move into your further items. The debate between Slark is to go treads or phase boots. I already have a video on YouTube about that, so instead of talking about it now, you can check that out, treads versus phase. I use Slark as an example. The best part about Slark, and what I used him to learn, is tread switching. So if you are not a tread switcher, please spam some Slark, man. Everyone will be so happy that they get to see a Slark in their game all the time. Tread switching on Slark is so good to practice because none of his skills are targeted, right? Dark Pact isn't targeted, his ult isn't targeted. Pounce, like, yeah, you have to face a direction, but you don't have to actually click anything. Your only purpose is to have to tread switch while using spells, right? And so the first step would be to tread switch every time you're farming with Dark Pact. That's like a great way to train tread switching. Every single Dark Pact, you're tread switching. And then you can start using it in fights, right? You can start pouncing and ulting and with your tread switching. But he's a great hero to practice that. That's how I learned tread switching. All of your early game items. I'm not a fan of Midas, at least as of right now, as long as they leave Essence Shift the way it is as a skill. I've tried it a few times, especially this patch where Midas is a good item. My idea of Slark is I need to envision a way that I'm going to participate in fights as early as humanly possible. Every patch, it's going to be a bit different. Your itemization is going to be a bit different. But because of the way the hero scales and the way his map control function works, you basically need to build in a way that lets you fight as early as possible. Some games, you can't fight till 2 or 3 items anyway. So maybe you go for like an SNY and a Diffusal, where the SNY, gives you more farming speed and also makes you more durable to pickoffs. But the idea is you need to have a vision as early as fucking possible that you can fight the opponent and that you can be active in the game. Usually it's with one small item, whether or not it's drums, Echo Saber, Diffusal. Any of these items can usually give you the ability to participate. When it comes to items like Wand, I usually complete it on him because he has such slow stat gains. So in lane, if I do buy a stick, a lot of times I do buy Wand just for the extra bit of stats. Really important on a hero like Slark. Orb of Venom's an item worth considering if you're against a melee hero that you can dominate in lane. I always consider Orb of Venom. And like I said, as many Wraith Bands as I need. Max 2. I usually, since I like Wand on Slark, a hero with mana issues, I usually only go 1 Wraith Band at max. But there are definitely games where I need to right-click the opponent a lot, and that extra bit of attack speed and armor is really nice. So after that early initial item, like I said, the options in my opinion are Echo Saber, Drums, Diffusal. I'd say some patches you can consider Shadowblade, but quite honestly, against better players, Shadowblade first usually doesn't work. So with that in mind, the new Silver Edge buildup has been really nice for Slark. But I think going straight Silver Edge kind of makes no sense. It used to be that you'd go Shadowblade, or you'd go Echo Saber, Shadowblade, and then for a while that didn't work anymore. And just because they made the 2 items one doesn't mean it works now, okay? So it's not saying that you never go Silver Edge on Slark, but going at first item makes no sense. It's the same as previously going Shadowblade and Echo Saber. So the first item almost always helps you lock onto targets. The drums get you in position, the Diffusal purges them, and the Echo Saber means once you hit them again. So guess what? Diffusal means I need to set up myself to hit people. Echo Saber means somebody else is going to set me up to hit people. Drums is like an all-around, I need that extra bit of movement speed for me and my team, right? People ask me all the time about Echo Saber versus Diffusal. Just think about it, goddammit! Diffusal sets up my Pounce, Echo Saber doesn't! Do I need to set up my own Pounce based on the heroes on my team? I have a Clock, a Disruptor, a Mag. I have a lot of stuns. I don't need to set up my own Pounce. So I'm going to go for the item that once I've now pounced them, I can lock onto my targets better. It gives me some mana regen. It's a bit cheaper, etc. So the next item after this damage item, because that is his first issue. Yes, I talked about survivability, but damage is almost always his first issue. The ability to actually threaten to hit people is Slark's first issue. Now that we've addressed the whole getting on top of them problem, we need the once we get on top of them, we just don't die problem. Every patch is different. Some patches you see Slarks go second item BKB. Some patches you see SNY. Some patches you see Halberd. Some patches you see just Basher as like an overall utility, like I don't need to necessarily save myself kind of item. I would say it's almost always a tanky item. Right now, the broken item's Halberd, but that could change in a week. So I don't want to tell you build Halberd every game. The Nico Baby build on Slark right now is to go Echo Saber Halberd. because the halberd lets him man up on carries that he often can't man up against in the mid game. It gives him that extra bit of tankiness. The regen from Sange goes really well with your ultimate. And this patch, really like either Diffusal into SNY or Echo Saber into halberd. And then after that, because you're tanky enough, usually it's like, okay, do I need an extra bit of tankiness, or do I need an extra bit of closing the gap now that they've gotten these initial survivability tools off? It's like, yeah, I have an Echo Saber, but what if the opponent now has 4 stabs and stuff that I need to be able to chase them further? So after the halberd, Sange, and Yasha BKB type item, I like to go an item that either tanks me up further or helps me hit them more. And usually it's both. Crazy. So Scotty comes to mind. Basher comes to mind. Shadowblade comes to mind. In this game, I ended up going Silver Edge, but I obviously want to delay it a bit because I have a bounty hunter on my team, so I don't want too much invis. But the idea is simple, right? Following these thoughts of how I approach Slark as a hero. And you want to think, okay, what issues am I going to face in these team fights? Is it actually getting on top of people? Is it once I get on top of them, I just died all the damage? And then as we go like S and Y and such, S and Y goes much better with your level 15 talent, the lifesteal talent, if you want to go that route. We can consider late game Satanics. Satanic on Slark is amazing in games where I talked about where you have no problem actually hitting people, but they just do so much damage to you while you're hitting them that you can't actually sustain through it. Satanic's really nice in those types of games. Completing the Abyssal, the Silver Edge, Butterfly, MKB. So like we talk about needing to hit people once they start getting evasion, maybe halberds of their own. MKB is a great consideration on Slark. First and foremost, survivability so you don't die before your ult goes off, and items that allow you to hit them, whether or not it's evasion, whether or not it's them kiting you, whether or not, whatever it is, what is stopping you from hitting them, buy an item to solve it. Because on Slark, hitting them is all that matters. Did I mention you're supposed to hit them on Slark? Small little tidbit on items for Slark. Ags has officially been nerfed into the dumpster. As of now, which is August 4th, 2020, if you buy Ags on Slark, I will report you. Not a bad item from Roche, though. Not bad to get from Roche. So with that in mind, we've talked about items, skill builds. We've talked about what I believe makes the hero the hero. We're going to talk about a couple of mechanics. Somebody asked, how do I feel about Lincolns on Slark? I would say that Lincolns does not help you hit people while tanking you up. So it's pretty much games where you're against like a Doom where you can go BKB, and then if you have a Lincolns, you're actually not lockable down. But unless you go BKB Lincolns against like Doom or Wyvern, I pretty much never go Lincolns. I think it's a bait because it's a tankiness item, unlike Scotty and SNY, that doesn't help you hit people at all. It just doesn't help you. So it has to be specifically to disable these like Bloodseekers, Dooms, and Wyverns when you already have a BKB and you have no problem hitting people. Lincolns is like a hyper snowballing item. You have to be like so far ahead on the map that your only concern is dying and not hitting them at all. Usually you have a little bit of a concern on both. So going Lincolns only solves one, and it often results in your teammates dying before you do because you have too much survivability and not enough damage. Okay. We're going to talk about some mechanics on Slark. So, first and foremost, Slark is a great hero to practice directional move. If you don't have a directional move hotkey, now's the time. Right here. So I use Alt-A. So for me, it's like issuing an attack command, but I use Alt with it. Basically what directional move does, it's useful for Pounce, by the way. If I want to pounce over this cliff, right? Say there's a hero right here. If I want to go over this cliff at them, I have to like right click in a way that's like right here, and then I have to pounce, right? With directional move, what it does is if I Alt A, and there's a hero right here, I just Alt A and then click right here. And my hero will run that direction regardless of pathing. Like I'm gonna run this way. My hero's just gonna jam himself into a corner. If there's nowhere to go, he's gonna face that way anyway. And then I can pounce. So you get in this habit of, hey, like I wanna go right here. Say I wanna go on this read right here, I just, boom, right? So the getting in the habit of using directional move on Pounce, it's something I didn't do for the first 600 games of Slark, honestly. And I regret it. I've finally gotten really good at it. But in the past, I was not good. It's really good when people are juking through trees. It's like I say, you know guys right here, and you're trying to chase them through the trees, and you pounce here, you'll just pounce in some random direction, right? But if you like know the guys in the trees and you just, directional move, you'll pounce on top of the trees. really important to use directional move. Like I said, with tread switching, I don't really believe in putting strength treads on Dark Pact anymore. Once you get level 6, since they buffed his level 1 regen ult, you just don't care enough about the damage from Pact. So you go on int, then go back to agi. Very rarely do you go back to strength, but sometimes your health is a dire concern, and you do. But for the most part, just get in the habit of tread switching on Slark. You can do it in a private lobby. Really good hero to practice tread switching on. Hope you guys learned something. I'll let my YouTube editor know that the guide's up.